Hello sorcerers, welcome back to the Crossroads for our third Crossroads of 2025. My name's Jesse Meulman-Marshall, and today we've got the finals from the Australian Crossroads from Melbourne, Australia, with Davide on the top of the screen playing Archimago and Jarrod on the bottom of the screen playing Druid. These two players were the two finalists of the 2024 Australia and New Zealand Championship. So not only do they have plenty of experience with Sorcery, but they've also met before in the finals of a big championship event. In that first event in 2024, Jarrod was the victor with his Geomancer Roots deck against Davide's Enchantress deck. And here in 2025 at the Crossroads, we have Jarrod on Druid and Davide on Archimago. So Davide starts off playing first. Jarrod was the higher seed and opted to play second with the Druid. So Davide leads off with a floodplain, and then Jarrod with a river and a tawny. So tawny, of course, an all-star of the format for the Druid, a loyal little spellcaster that not only casts spells from angles and places that the Druid might not easily be able to access itself, but also a little bird beast that is buffable with the Tor's Hammer trinket and can peck in for not only damage on sites, but also clear out opposing minions. Davide playing the Gnome Hollows in front of the Archimago, which is a great spot for the Gnome Hollows if you're the Archimago player, stopping the opponent from coming down that middle lane with large minions and also preventing large grapple shots, pudge hooks if that's what Davide is expecting. But here in this particular matchup, Jarrod is on a mono water list. This is a mono water list that does try and utilize larger minions like Lugbog Cat and also Pirate Ship. Lugbog Cat is going to be able to get right in behind the Gnome Hollows on that floodplain, but Pirate Ship from Jarrod's side is not going to be able to progress through the Hollows. So Davide's Gnome Hollows is going to have some utility for him in defending that side of the board from on that middle lane. We see a Lugbog Cat here coming not next to the Archimago, but in fact on Jarrod's side of the board. And this is a really interesting play because Jarrod knows that he's not going to be able to attack through that Hollows. He's elected to play the cat with the discount from the pond early, even though it might cause him to take a little bit longer to get into an attacking position. So Jarrod opting there for the mana efficiency of using the pond discount rather than the positioning efficiency and the tempo, perhaps, of playing the Lugbog Cat onto that floodplain on the next turn. Davide playing an Oasis, riptiding the cat on his previous turn across, and now Jarrod starting across here with a sinkhole that is actually going to be able to remove that Gnome Hollows. So that's certainly one way to deal with the Hollows. Davide taking one, the Lugbog Cat moving further up. So that perhaps was all part of the plan for Jarrod, knowing that he had the sinkhole coming next turn, not too worried about the Gnome Hollows. So Davide's Riptide probably did slow him down a little bit there. Nelly Longarms coming down on the home site there for Jarrod. And that's going to be a problem for Davide in terms of that Tawny and Lugbog Cat being able to move out of the way of that Nelly next turn, so that if Davide doesn't have an answer here for Nelly, then he's risking being pulled all the way across onto Jarrod's side of the board and pummeled by that Lugbog Cat and all manner of other things over the subsequent turns. Because Jarrod, of course, can move the Lugbog Cat back onto the home site, and then the projectile from Nelly could ignore it and pull the Archimago in, and then from next turn onwards, the Lugbog Cat would be in a position to attack. But Davide here has the Infiltrate, so going to infiltrate the Nelly Longarms, which is a pretty good solution so long as Jarrod doesn't have stealth detection, and you would expect that in a fully water list, stealth detection could be a little bit harder to come by. There could, of course, be things to return the Nelly Longarms to Jarrod's own hand, but as long as Davide doesn't use the Nelly Longarms ability, it's going to retain stealth, and the Infiltrate will mean that it will stay under Davide's control. So Jarrod electing to draw a spell. And if you were Davide here, you'd be pretty happy that you've managed to slow down the early aggression. This Archimago list looking like one that's tending towards a little bit more control. And Jarrod's list on the Druid trying to make use of early aggression. And there we see a really powerful use of Undertow. So despite Davide's best efforts to push that Lugbog Cat back onto the home site with the Riptide a couple of turns ago, The Undertow accelerates its return to the front lines, the Sinkhole clears out the Gnome Hollows, and then the Lugbog Cat is able to attack across from the Undertow that pulled it into the floodplain, I should say, for 4 damage. So as much as at the start of that turn, although Davide knew that the Sinkhole was on the board, he might have felt that at least he was 1 turn away from being hit by the Lugbog Cat. Unfortunately, the Undertow made short work of that for no mana spent on Jarrod's side. So Jarrod now with the mana from the Sinkhole, which was in play at the start of the turn, and then 3 more mana available, thinking about what he's going to do with that mana. And this would be a very dangerous spot for the pirate ship to come out if Jarrod did have a pirate ship to use. That 4 mana on. So I think he's just confirming that the Sinkhole was in play at the start of the turn, and so he does have that mana. He's electing to play a Tufted Turtles. So Davide will breathe a sigh of relief there, that it's a somewhat of a defensive minion in Tufted Turtles rather than the 5-power pirate ship. It could be that Jarrod, I should say, was a little worried about a Poison Nova from Davide, and that was why he opted to play the Tufted Turtles in a more defensive position further back rather than up on the Undertow. But then Tufted Turtles, of course, does have protection effectively from the first instance of damage. So if Davide did have a tower or some other way to accelerate himself to 5 mana this turn, he probably wouldn't be able to break the Tufted Turtles shield for the Poison Nova anyway. So it'll be interesting to see what Jarrod plans to do with those turtles next turn, whether it's another Undertow or a Riptide or something else to get them forward into a better position. So we've got Tawny and Cat on Davide's side of the field. He's got an Aqueduct putting him up to 4 mana. And then he's electing to use one of the spells from his cemetery using Archimago's ability. So he's banishing a Geyser, a Riptide, and an Infiltrate. And he's electing to infiltrate the cat. He's then going to move the Nelly Longarms down into a submerged position. So the Lugbog Cat and the Nelly Longarms infiltrated by the Archimago, meaning that the 2 most powerful minions, both in terms of raw power, but also in Nelly's instance, in terms of Nelly, with her ability to pull the Archimago into a very vulnerable position, Davide has managed to deal with both of those with an Infiltrate. So Jarrod now, back down to the 3 mana, going to go up to 4 again with a sight play this turn. And does he have the pirate ship or another aggressive minion here? So he's electing to tap to draw a sight, which means he probably drew a spell. That Tufted Turtles that he opted to play further back rather than up on the Undertow, he's moving up. And then Tawny's going to attack in. So the Infiltrates really have diffused a lot of the threat here for Davide. He's stabilized things somewhat on 13 life. And it looks like Jarrod doesn't have a play. So if you are in Davide's seat here, you're probably feeling a bit of a sigh of relief that Jarrod both didn't have a sight to play that turn to get up to 4 mana, which is somewhat of a dangerous spot to be with pirate ships and other threats in the deck at 4, but also that he didn't have a play at 3. So it was really a skipped turn in many ways for Jarrod. And the Tufted Turtles weren't even in a position to attack, so it was really just the Tawny that managed to get in for the 1 damage. And here with the Tufted Turtles pulled back by the Riptide onto the pond, that's going to delay them 1 more turn again from being able to attack. So does Davide have a way to capitalize here on this little bit of breathing room that he's got? He's thinking, it looks like, about whether to draw a sight or a spell. Not sure if he's got a sight in hand, I can't quite see. But if he doesn't have a sight in hand, then he's going to be staying at 4 mana, which is not necessarily a problem given that most of his 5-cost spells are things like Poison Nova. He does, of course, have higher cost spells in the deck. I believe his deck's playing Guards and other things at 6 and higher, even Craterize, for example. But he's not necessarily in as much of a rush to get to that as he is to find more gas to fill up his cemetery so that he can use his Archimago ability more effectively over the succeeding turns when Jarrod does come in with what is undoubtedly going to be more aggression. He's got a Kettletop Leprechaun, and that's his only play. So as much as Jarrod's turn was not particularly impactful the turn before, so the Kettletop, of course, followed up a Riptide. So Davide did use all of his mana. He got a blocker down in the Kettletop, but he's not really going to be able to defend the Tawny effectively with the Kettletop, since Jarrod can attack across onto the floodplain here with Tawny's airborne ability. So the Kettletop, not really a super impactful play, in some ways threatening to attack in future, but the Tufted Turtles is going to effectively deal with that. So really, Davide might have just really been cycling that Kettletop Leprechaun. Maybe he'll offer the attack next turn and the easy kill for the Turtles, just in order to draw the sight and effectively cycle the Kettletop into a sight. So here the Ruler of Thule actually comes through, attacks forward, and the Kettletop did prove helpful, because while it wasn't able to defend the Tawny, it was able to defend the Ruler of Thule's strike, and there wasn't really a way that Jarrod could get the Ruler of Thule through for damage, other than playing it onto the Undertow and then attacking across onto the floodplain, but instead electing to eat the Kettletop Leprechaun effectively. I was going to say trade, but he didn't trade with it because he didn't lose his Ruler of Thule. So yeah, interesting to think about why Jarrod didn't go for the attack across onto the floodplain. Perhaps he doesn't want Davide to be able to attack the Lugbog Cat into the Ruler of Thule, but then Davide would be giving back the Lugbog Cat at that point, so I'm not quite sure. Opting to disintegrate the Ruler of Thule here, which is going to banish it. That does get another magic into Davide's Cemetery, and then a Pendragon Legacy gets a third. So now Davide does have effectively another use of that Disintegrate, or the Riptide if he wants, but I imagine it's likely to be the Disintegrate on future turns, which at a minimum is going to let him deal with his Tufted Turtles, but could also let him deal with a bigger threat if Jarrod does have it. So depending on what Davide does have in hand here, and if he can follow up that Pendragon Legacy with some more effective magic to further fill up the cemetery, whether it's Common Senses, Poison Novas in future, that all remains to be seen. And Davide did sort of signal here that he might have a Poison Nova in hand by considering moving the Lugbog Cat up onto the pond and away from himself. Of course, as I mentioned before, the Poison Nova, if Davide does have it, is not going to be a particularly effective answer to Tufted Turtles. So it's going to be a question for him down to 10 from all this chip damage about whether he does want to use that Disintegrate on the Tufted Turtles. And now knowing that Jarrod has a Taurus Hammer Trinket in hand, it's going to become even more appealing for him to spend that Disintegrate, getting rid of a Turtles that's threatening to put him to death's door in not too many turns' time, especially combined with the Tawny that Jarrod is going to be able to summon when he plays his next site. So the Bower of Bliss comes down, which is a really interesting include in this mono water deck. Of course, it breaks up bodies of water, but if you're more interested in your pirate ships being silenced and therefore losing waterbound than you are in maintaining large bodies of water, or if you can risk having your body of water broken ever so slightly, or rather not expanded in this case, by occasionally drawing a non-elemental site and a non-water site that also significantly enhances the power of one of your main minions, then Bower of Bliss is the answer for you. And Jarrod will be very pleased to have seen that, not only to take out key cards in Davide's deck, such as Morgana Le Fay, perhaps even a King of the Realm, if Davide has that, but also to enable his own pirate ships to attack onto land sites. Of course, Davide's sites here are mostly water sites, so the waterbound restriction on the pirate ship, not a big deal in this particular game, but I know from watching some of Jarrod's other games throughout the day, and also Nick, who is also from Adelaide in Australia, who was playing the same deck that Jarrod was playing, that was a critical card in some of their earlier matches. So Davide here with a Fields of Camlan clearing off the board, and then an Angel's Egg to finish off his turn. Fields of Camlan allowing all of the minions to be killed except the Lugbog Cat, which... Did Davide attack that turn to return control of the Lugbog Cat? Or how did the Lugboard Cat lose stealth? I missed that. It's interesting that Davide had control of the Lugboard Cat and the Nelly Longarms, but he could have effectively killed the cat by just playing the Fields of Camland, but it seems like he specifically wanted to get rid of the Tufted Turtles or to incentivize Jarrod to keep the cat rather than the turtles by returning control to Jarrod of the cat, and therefore increasing the likelihood that Jarrod would elect to retain the cat over the turtles. Again, another signal that perhaps he does have a poison over in hand, but we'll see what comes of that. So the Angel's Egg now coming down and allowing him to go up in mana. Up in life, I should say, up to 8. And that is potentially going to give him enough space here to stabilize a bit, because the cat is ostensibly 2 turns away here from attacking again, now that it's back on that pond. And Jarrod did elect to kill the Tufted Turtles to the Fields of Camland, which was in a more attacking position. He also lost the Tawny, so he's going to be without another undertow or another way to move his cat up, at least a couple of turns away from chipping away further at Davide's life total. But here comes an Island Leviathan. And there's currently 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 water threshold on the board. Tawny comes down again. Davide knows that there's a Tor's Hammer Trinket in hand, but it looks like there's at least 2 or 3 other spells there as well in Jarrod's hand. And Jarrod here playing out the Tor's Hammer Trinket onto the cat, and then a Snowball, or considering playing a Snowball, which would be 5 from the cat, and then 2 from the Snowball itself, with that Angel's Egg coming in clutch and leaving Davide on 1. So 2 damage from the Snowball, and then 5 damage from the cat with the Trinket. And Jarrod just, every time Davide tries to use the Riptides or his other, or in this case it was just naturally moving the Lugboard Cat further back while it was infiltrated, every time Davide's trying to create himself some breathing room, Jarrod's using a movement effect, whether it's an Undertow or a Snowball, to get his minions closer and get them 1 turn closer to attacking and keep getting Davide's life total down. You know, if Jarrod didn't have that Snowball and was instead here just moving up the Lugboard Cat and passing, and Davide was going up from 8 to 9 at the end of Jarrod's turn, untapping and having the opportunity to remove the cat, he could potentially stabilize on a relatively healthy life total, passing back at 10 life. But instead, the Lugboard Cat comes in, attacks, gets Davide down to 1. He then heals up to 2. He's got another Aqueduct. He's going to move up the Nelly Longarms to the surface because he's now got this Island Leviathan threat he's going to have to contend with. And he does know that Jarrod is playing swaps. So that means that as soon as the Island Leviathan is live, he's going to have to be very wary of any swap shenanigans that could allow Jarrod to attack an undefended location. Davide with a swap of his own, it's not necessarily going to be particularly helpful here. So he's taken back the Aqueduct, thinking about whether to reposition that site somewhere else. Looks like he's got a Firebolts, a swap, a few other spells in hand there. He does have these 3 spells in his cemetery, so probably thinking about playing the Disintegrate, or potentially another removal spell. Attacks up with the Archimago onto the Undertow instead of playing the Aqueduct. Plays the Firebolts on Tawny, really not wanting to give Jarrod the opportunity to attack for 2 with the Tawny next turn, and potentially 3 if there's another Tor's Hammer Trinket, or if he has a way to get his Druid closer. Really prioritizing preserving that life total here. Rethinking that play, he's looked at the board and he's thought, oh, and I can see a Morgana and a Berry in hand. So we've got Morgana, Berry, Swap, and Firebolts in Davide's hand here. So the Morgana's silenced by the Bower of Bliss, which is removing a really significant opportunity that Davide has to get back into the game with a power play like Morgana. He does have the 3/5 threshold, but he doesn't have a way to remove that Bower of Bliss, it looks like. And that's going to silence that Morgana and prevent her from drawing cards. So Jarrod's just checking the Angel's Egg there is submerged under the home site because it was played into Nelly's hands and then Nelly was moved back up to the surface. So Davide really thinking through this play. Does he want to move up and spend that Firebolts just taking out Tawny to eke out that little bit more life? And he does. He opts to go with the play he initially thought. And he's killed the Tawny with the Firebolts. He's disintegrated the Lugbog Cat. He's passing back to Jarrod. He's going to go up to 3. He's removing Pendragon Legacy. And he's leaving just the Riptide. And the player's just separating out Davide's Cemetery into 2 piles there on the left of the screen. So we've got the non-magics above the Atlas, or below the Atlas from our perspective, and the magics above the spellbook from our perspective there in the normal cemetery spot. So currently the Riptide is the only magic in Davide's Cemetery, and then he's also got the Kettletop Leprechaun and the Gnome Hollows in there. So Jarrod here untapping, and I just noticed Davide does have his top 4 Crossroads Rainbow Avatar foils sitting there at the top of the mat on the right hand side. So Jarrod tapping here to draw a sight. So he's still 3 water threshold away from activating that Island Leviathan. But he doesn't have anything to add to the board this turn. So that's a huge stabilization point for Davide. He took a big risk expending so many resources clearing things off. Jarrod opting to draw a spell rather than to draw a sight and get a Tawny onto the board that turn, which does give Davide a bit of a reprieve. There's currently no Tawny on the board. We know Davide does have a bit of a brick hand here though. He's got a Berry, which is almost entirely useless in this matchup, though not quite. There are a couple of non-water sites on the board. He's got a Morgana that's blanked by the Bower of Bliss, somewhat cruelly. And then he's got a swap, or is it 2 swaps in hand, neither of which is doing anything good for him. Looks like a swap and a snowball, perhaps. So does he play out a sight? He doesn't want to play a sight in front of that Island Leviathan, which is and a little interesting conundrum here. Probably a reason why he took back that Reflexive Aqueduct play last turn as well, because playing in front of the Leviathan does give Jarrod, when he does activate it, an easy attack for 8 that he doesn't even need a swap to make happen. Whereas if he leaves that spot empty, at least Jarrod has to have a movement spell, whether it's a swap or an Undertow, to move the Island Leviathan across once it emerges, and then attack with it onto the Aqueduct that is there on square 4. So Morgana has come down here, hasn't drawn any spells, hasn't done anything good for Davide except be a 3 power body on the board. Which, you know, is not the worst. If one of your best minions has a lot of its power diminished, for it to still be a 3/3 power minion is at least some consolation prize. Although nothing close to the 3 spells that I'm sure Davide would have been very happy to get into his hand here. And it's almost going to get to the point where, depending on how useful Davide thinks this Morgana is going to be, he may want to think about moving one of his minions, whether it's Nelly or Morgana, onto a land site just so he can bury them, to get the berry out of his hand and potentially effectively draw a third of a card with it by getting it into his cemetery so that he can play a Riptide or something else, for example, to draw more cards. That would be a costly play, losing your own minion. Less costly perhaps if it's on the Nelly though. But the Nelly is still a couple of steps away from any land. She's firmly within the center of that body of water. Jarrod here just intimating that it would be nice for him if Davide would kindly play a sight into square 5 so that the Island Leviathan can attack. But instead, Jarrod playing his own sight there into square 5, summoning Tawny on the Troll Bridge and threatening another flank of attack. We've got a Mariner's Curse coming down as well. Swapping Morgana over onto the Troll Bridge and submerging her, which is going to kill her. but unfortunately not swapping her onto a land site from Davide's perspective, because he still can't spend that berry and get it into the cemetery. So Jarrod here, still in a pretty commanding position with Davide down to 5. He does have that ticking time bomb of the Island Leviathan that is going to come online at some point and be threatening attacks all across the board with the swap. And he does have a reasonably easy opportunity, if Davide isn't able to keep accessing consistent removal every turn, to utilize the Tor's Hammer Trinket to chip away at that 5 life. That isn't going to remove Davide's life because of the Angel's Egg, so it's effectively each turn cycle going to be keeping Davide steady, but it is going to prevent him from healing up to a safer life total over the few turns that Jarrod needs to build up that Isle Leviathan. So we'll see if Davide does have a way to deal with the Tawny to prevent that from happening and to give himself a chance to get back to a higher life total with the Angel's Egg healing, or whether indeed he draws other healings, whether he draws a Divine Healing, I was going to say. And there it is. So he's got a Divine Healing, which is going to further fuel his cemetery, but not to the extent that he is going to be able to easily flashback the Riptide and draw an extra card, because he still needs another magic in there. He's only got the Riptide and the Divine Healing currently. So Archimago going to draw a spell. He could, of course, flood the Bower of Bliss and Riptide the Tawny into it. But firstly, he doesn't have a third magic. And secondly, that would still mean the Bower of Bliss would be flooded on his turn and he wouldn't be able to bury it until his following turn, at which point there's almost no doubt that Jarrod would move the Tawny back onto one of Davide's sites. There would be a small chance that Jarrod would attack onto the step rather than the floodplain, which would allow Davide to get this cursed berry out of his hand that's otherwise just rotting there. But a bit of a nothing turn, really. A Divine Healing is fine for Davide to get a bit more of a stable life position, but he really needs to be advancing his game and setting up some long-term card advantage rather than treading water. Because Jarrod still has a number of spells. I think I can see a 0-1 Hydra in his hand as well. Be curious to see whether he elects to play that out this turn. Nelly, of course, has the ability to remove 0-1 Hydra relatively easily. Jarrod perhaps remarking there on how lucky it was, or fortunate, not lucky, that his opponent Davide was not able to draw cards from that Morgana Le Fay. So in comes Tawny, takes Davide down to 12. He will heal up to 13 at the end of Jarrod's turn. So it looks like the Mariner's Curse that was bounced last turn. I can see a Mirror Realm, a swap, and a 0-1 Hydra. I think that was a swap in Jarrod's hand. And so he really is playing to a pretty clear endgame here, where he is going to be able to use the Island Leviathan to get in for some pretty significant damage with that swap on any turn he wishes to. Oh, it's a Mesostor Worm, not a 0-1 Hydra. And playing against a deck that's so heavy on water, as Davide's, does mean he has the opportunity to attack in with that Mesostor Worm next turn. So the Trinket returns to hand, the life total for Davide goes back up to 13, and Jarrod is now sitting with a relatively threatening monster on site 5 that is threatening to attack across onto site 4 next turn. Something that Nelly's not even going to be able to do anything about, because the Mesostor Worm has Submerge. So it's going to be completely immune to being harmed by Nelly. Davide with a Tithe, which is helpful, but probably not the exact magic that he wanted to see there, given he really needs some more action here. He would have probably liked to see a Poison Nova, perhaps a Common Sense to just keep filling up the cemetery, but a Poison Nova at least would have allowed him to move over onto the Autumn River, for example, and kill both the Nelly and the Mesostor Worm. So he is flooding the step, riptiding the Tawny back onto the step, swapping the Tawny and the Mesostor Worm, which will mean the Mesostor Worm will be disabled on Jarrod's turn, and then he's hoping that he's going to be able to finally use that berry on the disabled worm. And we're seeing here a Craterize in Davide's hand, which, you know, does give him a pathway to dealing some substantial damage, and does mean that any chip damage he's able to get in here on Jarrod from perhaps the Nelly Long Arms attacking is going to take Jarrod down to 13, and then he's only 3 damage away from Death's Door if Davide can get up to that Craterize. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 mana currently for Davide. So he does have enough sites already in play to cast. Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I miscounted. Counted the Troll Bridge as one of Davide's, but it's not. So he's 1 site short. He's opting to tap and draw a site, which is curious there. Perhaps not wanting to fill up what could be his last site play opportunity on square 16, because if he plays to 16, then Jarrod can play to 17 next to it. And then perhaps wanting to retain the opportunity to use the Pillar of Xeros to gain some more life as his last site play. And if all he's planning to do is play the Craterize, and if in any event he's not going to be able to get above 8 mana because Jarrod can block him off here, then it does make some sense not to play that site now, because a couple of life here or there from the Pillar of Xeros could be critical. Now, Davide knows here that Jarrod does have a Grimgusarm in his deck as well, which when combined with the Isle of Leviathan will allow him to get a pretty substantial amount of damage down with very few minions. So he's seeing the Torshammer Trinket and the Tawny from Jarrod, and Jarrod would be wanting... I mean, in many ways, Jarrod's got the inevitability here of the Island Leviathan and of Davide's relatively low life position. But he does need to keep up a bit of pressure because Archimago can accumulate that advantage pretty quickly, and the Mesostor Worm swap back onto the Aqueduct is a absolutely critical play. He's now... Has he got enough mana to play the Mariner's Curse? That's a big question here. Because if you can play the Mariner's Curse, then the Nelly Longarms can't even defend the attack from the Mesostor Worm, because it will get submerged before it's able to defend. So he spent 1 on the Trinket, 3 on the swap, and he's only got 2 mana remaining. Does he have a site in hand? I'm not sure that he does. Oh no, he does have 7 mana. Keep miscounting his mana because I keep thinking that Trollbridge is Davide's. So he does have 3 for the swap, 3 for the Mariner's Curse, and 1 for the Trinket. So he's able to make that play. He gets the Mariner's Curse down, the Mesostor Worm comes in, and now if the Nelly Longarms comes across to defend on square 4, it will get immediately submerged. That will bounce the Mariner's Curse, so it will mean that on future turns, Davide is able to defend so long as Jarrod is not willing to invest 3 mana in replaying the curse, but it's probably better than staying still and doing nothing and just leaving the curse there. So he's effectively taxing Jarrod 3 mana on a future turn by moving in to defend, but he's putting his Nelly in a... well, his stolen Nelly, which was Jarrod's, in a slightly worse position by having it submerged under the Aqueduct. So Davide is just thinking about whether to defend, understanding that the consequence of the Mariner's Curse is that the Nelly will be submerged, the Mariner's Curse will be bounced, but the damage from the Mesostor Worm will still go through. And he's electing here to... defend and get rid of the Mariner's Curse. He takes 7 damage. He is going to heal back up to 6 at the end of the turn. But that was a big swing, not only because he lost the ability to bury the Mesostor Worm, but also took a substantial amount of additional damage after spending so much time and so many resources recuperating his life total to a bit of a safer state where even if Jarrod had the swap and was able to activate the Leviathan, he still needed something like a Gusam to be able to get Davide down to 0 in one blow. Now Davide's back below, but has a life total back below the power of the Island Leviathan. So the Island Leviathan is all of a sudden becoming a Death's Door threat, even on its own at the moment. And he has another Death's Door threat in the Mesostor Worm that he has to deal with as well. So a Mirror Realm comes down here, copying the Island Leviathan or the Undertow. I think Jarrod's considering. He thinks he wants both. So he could move the Archimago across next to the Island Leviathan. And he has, what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 water threshold currently. So he'll go up to 7 with this Mirror Realm, which is not quite enough to activate that Island Leviathan. So if he copied the Undertow, dragged the Archimago across, he wouldn't quite be able to use the Leviathan. So, that is one spot where having the Barrow of Bliss does hurt him, because if the Barrow of Bliss was a water site, he would actually be able to send Davide, I should say, to Death's Door this turn. But, the Barrow of Bliss has been helpful to him this game, stopping Davide from drawing 3 spells with the Morgana. So Nelly untaps. Davide will finally be able to use that berry on the Tawny if he wishes. But he's now staring down 2 Island Leviathans, both of which are thankfully not in a position to attack on the turn that they animate, without further assistance from a movement spell or from an Undertow. And I can see a guards there. We've got the Pillar of Xeros, which is going to help to resuscitate some of that life, revitalizing Davide's life total up to 10. Unfortunate anti-synergy with the Disintegrate that he played earlier in the game on 2 of Jarrod's minions. And now he's got a Craterize in hand. And he's considering whether he has enough mana to do it. He does. So he Craterizes the Mesostor Worm out of existence by destroying the Troll Bridge, which is interesting because he's doing damage to himself, no damage to Jarrod, not getting closer to winning, but he's getting a lot further away from losing because he's not going to Death's Door next turn. It's a brutal way to have to spend your Craterize as the Archimago player here. Hurting yourself more than the opponent, but removing the threat that was representing Death's Door next turn. And prolonging the game, clinging on. Of course, Archimago is going to have the ability to replay the Craterize on a later turn. But we do have the Tawny now still online. The berry wasn't able to be played. And so the Tawny Tor's Hammer Trinket is going to keep chipping away at Davide's life total. There comes the Island Leviathan to show what the Mirror Realm has copied. Jarrod very kindly electing to put it into a sleeve so that it matches the rest of the sites. And there comes that 0-1 Hydra. So there was one. Maybe there was both a 0-1 Hydra and a Mesostor Worm, or maybe the 0-1 Hydra was just drawn. I'm not sure. So with a Hydra, it's now an untap. And that Hydra combined with the Tawny, now representing Death's Door again. So back to you, Davide. Do you have another removal spell that can deal with a 0-1 Hydra? Is it a Poison Nova? Is it another Disintegrate? Or is it going to be going to prove too difficult to take that down? Interestingly, Davide does have the option here to move up onto the pond and play guards, which would summon quite a few defenders. But if he doesn't do that and he plays guards from his current position, then they're not going to be able to defend on that Pillar of Xeros. So although the Pillar gained Davide some life, and it did get him to 8 so that he could Craterize, it is also presenting and posing a challenge for him in that it's difficult for him, even with the guards, summoning 9-foot soldiers to cover all of his sites defensively. He does have a Kettletop Leprechaun. Which if he is able to defend the Hydra's attack next turn, and if Jarrod doesn't have a way to get the Kettletop out of the way, the Hydra could end up on the Pillar of Xeros and therefore be vulnerable to Bury. And Davide may again finally be able to get some use out of that Bury that's been languishing in his hand all game. He's also got a Snowball, which is no good against the Hydra, but it could potentially, if he was to draw something like a Boudica here, allow him to put Jarrod to death's door pretty much out of nowhere with these guards. Although, of course, Boudica is going to be silenced by the Bower of Bliss, so much for that plan. It's going to have to be something else. So let's have a look at Davide's hand there. I can see a Mirror Realm in his own hand. He could copy the Island Leviathan, but that's not a really particularly profitable way for him to interact with the Leviathan, because although it would create, if he did have the Threshold, which I'm not sure if he could get from his floodplains, I don't think so, given he's got so many land sites played on the bottom left of the screen here away from his floodplains. But even if he could get up to 8 Water Threshold and activate a copied Island Leviathan, wouldn't be much use to him defensively, particularly with a swap. So he does get the defend off the Kettletop Leprechaun on the Hydra. The Hydra is now stranded on a non-water site, on a land site. So could the Bury come in clutch here? He can, of course, replay the guards, but he's got now a couple of power spells in his cemetery between Crater Ice and guards that he's going to want to think about in terms of whether he uses them. So Jarrod with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And he's got the floodplain for the Bower of Bliss. So up to 8. Water Threshold. So flooding the Bower of Bliss. Leaving behind a flooded rubble. The Island Leviathan is finally active. This is the Mirror Realm Leviathan, not the original one. He's leaving that one unactivated by the looks of things. And one thing Davide did do with his swap, that he swapped the Mestastor Worm over onto the step, is that he forced Jarrod to use his own swap to get the Mestastor Worm back. And so that does prevent Jarrod from doing anything too profitable with this Leviathan. And instead, Davide is able to defend the strike from the Leviathan. Or rather, the Leviathan just attacks the Foot Soldier, because that is Jarrod's site after all. Tawny comes in, attacks for 2. Foot Soldier, it looks like, is opting not to defend. And there's a question here with the guards in the cemetery for Jarrod about whether he just wants to flip and get his Thorns active so that Davide can't play further guards. I think he's thinking here about whether to move up first. But no, he does go for the non-greedy play. It would be, the more greedy play would be moving up first and then doing that next turn. But then if Davide does flush back the guards and play it again on the intervening turn, then the ability from the Druid would be a little bit less useful, although it would still prevent the Foot Soldiers from moving around. But instead here, flipping, preventing any Foot Soldiers from being summoned on those front 3 sites, which is 12, 13, and 14. And then a Lugbog Cat in the top left corner. So once again, and a Tufted Turtle's right on top of Davide's avatar. So once again, the Archimago finds itself a little bit surrounded. And I think when the Hydra attacked in and the Kettletop Leprechaun was able to defend, even once the Island Leviathan had animated and attacked one of the Foot Soldiers, and even once the Druid had flipped, Davide might have been feeling okay about where he was in the game, especially since he knew he had the Bury to answer the Hydra. But just those extra 2 threats that Jarrod had, the Tufted Turtles and the Lugbog Cat, since the Island Leviathan activation cost no mana, made things just that little bit more challenging from Davide's perspective. So Jarrod just coolly, calmly, and collectedly playing out this game, just presenting consistent threats, just asking whether, do you have the answers? Do you have the answers? Do you have the answers? And even if you have the answers for all of my onboard plays in a spell sense, I've still got these 2 Island Leviathans that are threatening at any moment to take you to death's door with a swap anywhere on the board, that I can swap away one of your minions or my Tawny and attack somewhere that's unguarded. The advantage here for Davide is that there aren't many places on the board that are unguarded because guards does a good job of guarding. So breaking the shield on the tufted turtles with 1 foot soldier, and then potentially using 2 other foot soldiers to take it down, is one method of removal. So he spent 3 mana from the berry, and then it looks like he might be wanting to consider playing the guards as well, but he's going to be 1 mana short unless he plays onto that rubble that Jarrod has very kindly left open for him in front of the Island Leviathan, which I don't think Davide is going to want to do. Unless he has a Gnome Hollows in hand, which it looks like he might actually. Instead of attacking with further foot soldier, he's going to Firebolt, which is going to take out the Tufted Turtles and the Tawny, ignoring Davide's own allied foot soldier on the same site as the Firebolts originated from. But he has managed to pretty effectively clear the board here. Of course, any swap for Jarrod is going to be devastating the more minions that Davide taps or loses. So Davide does have to be just so careful, even about attacking in with that foot soldier on his backline. He kind of just has to leave them untapped so that they're covering as much territory as possible, because Bruin or the Leviathan being swapped in is just going to be so devastating for him. So the question then here for him is, does he want to play that Craterize next turn? And if so, what's that going to look like? So Craterize could threaten to take out Bruin and the Island Leviathan potentially, the one that's been animated. Not sure there what happened with the Bruin and why that was tapped. Oh, it might have been a defend. I think, yeah, one of the foot soldiers attacked and Bruin defended. Which is probably not great for Davide in some ways. I mean, in some ways it's good to have that there, the Bruin further up, because he is going to have to do one of the higher damage squares from the Craterize onto the Island Leviathan. And that's going to mean that he wants as much damage as possible onto Bruin. So not having it on the back row might be helpful for him, depending on where both the Leviathan and the Bruin end up next turn. Having them closer to each other is better. But now he's considering perhaps realizing that he doesn't have the mana to play the guards at this point. Or does he? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So if all he's played is Firebolts, then he does have the mana for guards. Looks like he's opting to move back, probably in preparation for the Craterize next turn. And then he is going to go ahead and play the guards here. There's a question there about whether he would have been better off. Oh, he's swapping Bruin and the cat. That's interesting. Wow. Okay. And he's going up to 9 and passing the turn. And so a swap on a Leviathan with Bruin, if Jarrod does have his own swap, is going to put Davide to death's door. Most likely, because the Island Leviathan will be able to attack back onto the step. Not sure if he can then get another damage though. So Davide, it might be safe. I'd be safe. The Bruin could attack first, actually, back onto the step, and then the Island Leviathan could swap. So no, he would have death's door if he had a swap. So Davide leaving himself open to the swap death's door, but at this point, I think with 2 swaps in Jarrod's cemetery, perhaps playing the odds that was less likely. And we see the Narcotic Manuscript coming down, which is going to allow Jarrod to effectively draw a card a turn, or draw a spell a turn, with the Island Leviathan. The second Leviathan gets activated. Jarrod perhaps now, in some ways with Davide being back on the back row again, but also, just given the stage of the game, electing to activate the second Leviathan, which does make them both vulnerable in the sense that he knows Davide does have a Craterize in the cemetery, and Davide could potentially take out both of those Leviathans with a combination of spells and foot soldier attacks. So it'll be interesting to see whether Jarrod does move up the Druid, and he does indeed, to prevent those foot soldiers from interacting with the Leviathans, and then moves the Leviathan across, which is going to really mean that only one of the foot soldiers can interact, but then he's not just moving it across, he's also attacking that foot soldier. The other foot soldier has to watch on, because if he tries to come in and defend, then the Druid's Thorns are going to kill it. So both of the Leviathans now protected, I should say, by the Druid's Thorns. Jarrod drawing an extra spell a turn here off the manuscript. Davide with only 2 spells in the cemetery, though one of them is Craterize. A Lugbog Cat that can't get in for damage this turn, but Bruin can. Back onto the step and to put Davide down to 5. But Davide doing a great job here of defending a Death's Door that seemed inevitable many turns ago, staving off the many blows that Jarrod's throwing his way, and with a little bit of a trump card in a way in the Craterize sitting there in a cemetery, but Jarrod just meticulously still working his way through the problem, saying, I'm in no rush, I've got these 2 Leviathans, they're coming for you, they're going to eat your foot soldiers can't come in and help each other, they can't gang up on the Leviathans, they can't defend once I remove the ones on the key sites, like I'm doing right now with this Lugbog Cat. And eventually, this weight of numbers is going to take you down. That's what Jarrod is presenting to Davide, and we'll see whether Davide has anything here other than this Craterize that's going to allow him to get out of this predicament. Craterize, of course, now that the Lugbog Cat and the second Leviathan are so close to his sights, going to present him a bit of a problem in terms of the splash damage to himself. So Angel's Egg puts him back up to 5 after the Bruins' trinket-powered attack. And Davide now considering his options. So he has a Snowball, which is not going to do enough to take out the Leviathans. He can push the Druid away, which is going to unlock some of the Thorns and allow his foot soldiers on the back row to move up 1 step. But having them 1 step closer is not all that impactful if they're tapped. And of course, Jarrod can then just move up the next turn and prevent any further movement. Sideways, of course, because movement towards Jarrod's back row would already be prevented by the Druid's Thorns, even if he was pushed by the Snowball back onto his back row. But 5 mana to kill the Lugbog Cat here. I'm not sure about that. But Davide really doesn't have many options. If the Thorns weren't there, he could move all the foot soldiers up, he could move his Archimago up, and he could actually roll the Lugbog Cat sideways towards the Bruin and take them both out. That still wouldn't deal with the Leviathans staring down at him. And it would, of course, give one of the Leviathans actually a path to attack him. But it feels like being on 5 and going up only to 6, he is going to need to think about, in the next 2 turns, how he's going to deal with that Bruin. And once that Leviathan now attacks onto the back row, he doesn't have all that many defenders. He's hedging a little bit here by moving a foot soldier across. It's interesting that he hasn't moved the other foot soldier on the Oasis across, because that would then defend on the following turn. He is here continuing to chip away at Jarrod's life total, with a bit of damage from the Snowball and a bit of damage now from that foot soldier attacking on the Bower of Bliss. And he's considering whether to play down this Gnome Hollows, but the Island Leviathan's now in a position to attack anyway. So he's instead playing down a Mirror Realm. copying the river, getting a peek at the top card of his spellbook, and electing to keep it there. So I wonder what that is on top of his spellbook that he's elected to keep there. Jarrod with 3 spells in hand, splayed out on the battlefield. And Davide considering what to do. He is currently facing down 5 from Bruin with the trinket, so he has to do something. And he's playing yet another mortal, another unique mortal that loses some of its uniqueness because of the Bower of Bliss. Or at least some of its abilities. So he goes up to 6. So the Bruin with 1 trinket wasn't actually threatening him for Death's Door next turn, but still deciding that it's not worth risking going down to 1, given that a single further trinket would allow Jarrod to take him down to Death's Door. So Jarrod here electing to draw a spell. If he can answer that Lady of the Lake on his turn, then he's going to be able to attack Davide for at least 5. Jarrod flips over a Mariner's Curse with the Island Leviathan that has the Narcotic Manuscript. Riptides the Archimago forwards. Could have moved the Druid up, interestingly, before Riptiding the Archimago, which would have actually done 1 damage to the Archimago there. But maybe looking to play a scythe this turn, we'll see. Opts to draw a spell. Opts to attack the Archimago with the Island Leviathan, which puts Davide down to Death's Door. So the 1 damage from the Thorns doesn't really matter when you got a giant island looking down at you about to crush you in its monstrous jaw. And then the Bruin can take out the Lady of the Lake. And it's all feeling just that little bit more forlorn for Davide now. The Angel's Egg life gain, even the Divine Healing life gain, not managing to keep him away from Death's Door with just the volume of threats and also their size that Jarrod was presenting. Jarrod considering whether to move the Bruin across, back near its companion Druid, to protect the Druid from damage, but more importantly at this stage, given the life totals, to threaten another attacker onto Davide's Archimago. So taking back the attack on the Lady of the Lake, considering instead whether to do something else with the Bruin. So we know that Jarrod's got a couple of Mariner's Curses and at least 1 Tor's Hammer Trinket in hand, but it looks like he does have another couple of spells as well. But he's probably not going to need too many spells here, given the Druid's Thorns are keeping the Foot Soldiers back. He's got an Island Leviathan sitting on top of the Archimago, and he's got a Druid that's going to be able to attack him next turn, and he's still got this Lugbog Cat that he hasn't moved up as well. Plays a Pirate Ship, moves the Bruin across. Interesting that he's played the Pirate Ship there to the left, perhaps hedging in case Davide does move himself to the left, but that would require him to have a Riptide or something else to move the Druid out of the way again, or perhaps play that Snowball from his cemetery. So Davide can move back to his back row. He can Riptide Jarrod's middle row of his Island Leviathan and his Druid back onto the river at the bottom of the screen. And then he does have a couple of Foot Soldiers to potentially defend himself. But he will, of course, be vulnerable to any snowballs or other effects that Jarrod can send back his way. But at least for Davide here, there is a glimmer of hope in that snowball in his cemetery. But that Pirate Ship and the Lugbog Cat and the Bruin all lining up in that column just to the left of center, threatening to march across the board and attack the Archimago themselves. So Jarrod passes the turn, and does Davide play the snowball? Looks like really his only option in many ways. He can move the 3 foot soldiers in, which is interesting, to the floodplain, and then he would be able to actually hit the Druid for 5 damage, which Jarrod is on 9. He could attack with the Lady of the Lake for 3 more, but he would need to be able to remove the pirate ship as a defender. But instead he's opting to move the foot soldiers off to the flanks, which if he is planning to play the snowball, yeah, it seems like perhaps wrapping those foot soldiers, pardon me, up into the snowball might be helpful, but I guess the issue is the Druid's Thorns are going to deal with them before they even get there. So scupper that plan. That wasn't doing anything. The Thorns on the Druid really dealing very effectively with these foot soldiers and preventing them from having any impact on the game. Those ones on the back row, even in a snowball, they wouldn't even make it safely. So from Jarrod's perspective, just continuing to grind out. He's got him down to death's door. He's got plenty of units on the board. He's covered all the critical spots. And then there comes a Poison Nova. So that's going to take out Bruin. It's going to take out both the Island Leviathans. It's going to take out Bruin. And the pirate ship. I think I said Bruin twice. And then it's going to move the Archimago back onto the floodplain. So he's now got the snowball still in the holster here. He can attack in... No, that's his site. So no attacking for Lady of the Lake. So he's still got the snowball to push the Druid away if the Druid does move up next turn. He's got the Firebolts to threaten another 3 damage in the cemetery. And what else does he have in hand? Could he deal 9 next turn to Jarrod? So Jarrod draws. He's lost both his Leviathans. He's lost his pirate ship. He's lost his Bruin. Even a swap's not going to do it here. And that's why, from Davide's perspective, getting those foot soldiers away from his avatar was actually critical. Moving them away to the flanks where they can't be a threat, even with a swap. A threat to him, that is. Jarrod thinking here about moving the avatar up. And of course, if Jarrod moves the avatar onto that undertow, then that will lock Davide's avatar in place. Unless, of course, he uses that snowball to push the Druid away. And I think throughout this game, it's just been fascinating seeing how both players have utilized Water's movement mechanics and force movement to great effect. To move things out of the way, to put Mestor worms out of the water and onto the land, and then back into the water again. To get attackers from Jarrod's perspective into position to attack turns earlier than they otherwise would have. And early on with Davide using the power of the water in Riptide to try and pull the attackers away. It's really been a game of tides moving back and forth. A Mariner's Curse here, a Dispel from Davide, which finally, from his perspective, I think gets one of those spells out of his hand that he's probably been waiting to get rid of for a while. Or perhaps he just drew that. He could have used it on the manuscript, of course, earlier. He could have used it for no effect earlier if he wanted to, because you can target a location without targeting a particular artifact or aura. But nonetheless, it's another magic in his cemetery, which is going to allow him to replay either Snowball or Firebolts, I suppose, potentially, whilst still retaining the Crater Eyes in his cemetery, which could prove to be a useful finisher later if he needs it. So he is indeed replaying the Snowball, pushing the Druid back, dealing 1 damage, putting him down to 8. Moving the foot soldiers now on top of the Archimago, so much for that plan of not being vulnerable to swap. feeling like he needs to get out of line so that a snowball from Jarrod's side, I guess, is not going to be threatening, since Jarrod doesn't have a sight on space 19. He can't actually move across and line up a snowball shot now. So I think Davide banking that with 2 swaps in the cemetery on Jarrod's side, it was less of a threat. Jarrod moving his Druid into the wrong spot when he untapped, moving it back. So now it is sort of getting to the point, and this can be an issue with water, although less so with Druid, where you do have so many ways to deal the death blow with the Druid's own ability. But it does show that water does still lack some of those finishes when the opponent's at death's door. Davide expertly managing to avoid the death blow here with his own forced movement. But that Plague of Frogs combination with the manuscript is going to threaten to draw another 7 cards next turn. So Davide, while he's spent all this time clearing the board, getting himself the breathing room to replay that Crater Rise to send Jarrod to death's door, is now staring down the barrel of 7 cards that could be drawn by Jarrod next turn. But he could use the Crater Rise to potentially clear them out. Because, of course, if those frogs and the manuscript are on the surface, then the Crater Rise could be lethal to them as well. Jarrod considering playing Mariner's Curse, does indeed get that down. Nope, rethinking that. He doesn't, and Davide untaps. So we're going to see the Crater Rise here to try and turn things around. He can even attack... Oh no, he can't attack with 2 foot soldiers. The Druid has moved up, so those Thorns are active. They're covering that Autumn River and the Undertow. The other foot soldier on the other side of the board, not in a position to attack any of Jarrod's sites. And in fact, the board has shifted and changed throughout the game with those Leviathans getting up and moving, and now it looks like, in fact, all of Jarrod's sites are covered by the Thorns of the Druid at the moment, in the particular spot that it's in. So a Gigantism from Davide on his Frog. He's going to attack and put Jarrod to 2. And then replayed the Firebolts to put Jarrod down to death's door and moves the Archimago out of the way. So he doesn't have any spells in hand. Davide is, I think, passing there with 3 sites by the looks of things. So no easily accessible death blow, but he has put Jarrod to death's door, and he said, do you have your own death blow from these effectively 8 cards that you're going to draw? So Jarrod needs Riptide. There it is. So he's able to move up his avatar, play the Riptide the Archimago across onto the Aqueduct, and deal the death blow. And well played to our players. What an absolutely epic match. So Jarrod, after winning the Australia-New Zealand Championship in 2024 against Davide in the final, takes Davide down again at the 2025 Melbourne Crossroads. Surely that's the beginning of an epic rivalry. We'll see what happens next time, if the next time those two meet. And thank you for being with us for this epic match. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time with the finals from the SCG Houston Crossroads. We'll see you then.